This year, I didn't just read books. I descended into hell. I walked amongst gods. I saw love rot and bloom again. I questioned God. I questioned men, even questioned myself, and I came out fundamentally changed. And if there's one thing that I have learned this year, is that books don't just entertain us. They reveal a truth that is hidden deep within us. So today, for the last video of the year, I want to sit down with you and talk about all the books that I have read in this 2025 and what these stories have taught me about humanity, love, power, faith, religion, and myself. Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. I hope your weekend was filled with heavy holiday meals, one too many drinks, and that liminal feeling that you get at the end of the year when time feels slow, reflective, and even a little bit haunted. The end of the year always makes me introspective. It always makes me not only think about the things that I have been doing this past year, but also the person who I am becoming for this next year, right? All the things that I have experienced, but also all the things that that have influenced in me or that have made me a different person. And to be fair, reading has always made me feel this way. I have always felt a different person after reading every book that I read or every book that I have read this past 2025. So instead of making a list or just making a top and bottom list of books that I have read this 2025, I actually want to talk about all these books that I have read this year, but also what I learned from them and what these books and these stories have taught me. This 2025, I have read a total of 23 books, and I will separate all of them depending on what category I think they fit best. So starting with the first category, it's historical books. And in this category, I added 3 of the books that I have read this 2025, which are the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then also the Divine Comedy. So obviously Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. At first glance, if you look at Homer and if you look at Dante, you could say that they are worlds apart, right? They have different cultures, they are from different eras, and also they have completely different cosmologies, right? We are talking about the Greek mythology, and then we are talking about early Christianism or Catholicism. But reading them side by side, it actually revealed something deeply unsettling to me, and it's the fact that humanity has always been obsessed with religion, with meaning, hierarchy, and having like an ultimate divine power that makes the decisions for you. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, we see how the gods are cruel. They are petty, they are fighting battles that have been fighting for eons, and they are always involved in human business, right? And at the end of the day, heroicism or people who want to become these big godly figures, like Achilles, for example, they are not heroes. They are just people who are looking for glory, who just thrive in violence, and they are just looking for remembrance. On the other side, Dante's Divine Comedy, even though it feels more structured or more moral, it's still no less terrifying, right? Because if we look into the godly power that we see in Dante's Divine Comedy or in all 3 poems, we see how this godly power is unyielding, right? It's final and it's something that is decisive, right? And even though we don't really see a hero or a classical hero that we see in the Iliad or in the Odyssey, we can also assume that Dante is considered the figure of the hero, right? He has this power to fall through the whole story, but also he gets the divine permission and the divine heroism that he so much researches and he so much wants. What these 3 books have taught me is that humans always externalize power. Whether it's Olympian gods or the Christian gods, we always create a bigger and more powerful being that explains our suffering, that creates this suffering, but also justifies it. And that allows us to not feel under control of our pain and also to understand why this pain exists, and also at the same time to make sure that we understand that there is something better waiting for us in the future. Getting into the second category of books that I have read this 2025, I have named this category the classics. And the books that I have read that fit into this category are Wuthering Heights, The Idiot, The Stranger, A Clockwork Orange, East of Eden, and The Master and Margarita. The classics that I have read this year actually all circled around the same unsettling truth. And it's the fact that we love to say that we are independent, that we are self-made individuals, and that we are not controlled by anyone, but actually we all are deeply shaped and transformed and often deformed by everything that raises and everything that is around us, which is culture, environment, and family. These stories explore what happens when love is confronted by social expectations, or when morality is dictated by cultural expectations rather than empathy, or most importantly, what happens when people are crushed under systems that they have no control over. Love becomes obsessive, goodness becomes naive, and violence becomes the norm. These stories are not something that we read for comfort, but they are stories that we read to realize what is the reality within our society, what are the things that have become normal, and what are the things that makes us hurt. What are the things that actually shouldn't be normalized, but we still consider the new normal because that's something that everyone does and everyone has normalized. What I love the most about these stories is the fact that there is no easy villain. There is not someone that everyone understands they should hate, but we have characters who are neither the villain nor the hero. There are characters who make mistakes, who are imperfect, who are ugly, and who also have ugly emotions that they have to overcome. These are the things that I love the most about these books, and also what I tend to love about classics, because we create this idea that our identity has to be perfect, that we have to be the perfect moral compass, whereas at the end of the day, we are not perfect creatures. We are just people who are trying to be better every day, and that is what the classics show us. And these stories also confront us with the idea that at the end of the day, these things that we feel or the way that we are and we behave are not something that is inherently within us. It's something that culture shapes for us. It's something that culture and society show us that that's how we have to behave, right? So at the end of the day, we as individuals have the freedom to decide whether we want to behave as such as culture has shown us, or if we should be free of behaving the way we want, to becoming more empathic, but also becoming better people to make society change. Now, the third category of books that I have read in this 2025 is the category that I have nominated the religious category. In this category, there are only two books at the moment, which are Conclave and The Monk, but these two books have actually really influenced me in this past 2025. Even though these two books are highly different, what these stories have taught me is that religion has revealed itself to me not as faith, but as control. These two books show how religion is often used as a weapon of control, as a weapon to control people, rather as a community of people who believe in the same faith. For example, in The Monk, we see how religion is not used as a tool for the faithful, but as a tool for repression. We see how this deep sense or this deep need for morality within the religious spaces, we see how this creates a deep sense of repression and shame. And these feelings actually create monsters. It creates aggression and it creates violence towards people, but more especially towards women. And same thing with Conclave. We see how even though religiousness and this deep sense of connection with God is something that exists even within the political environment of Catholicism, we see how this deep sense of religion can also be tainted by our own individual desires for power, for ego, but also desire to control. In general, what these two books have told me is that this deep desire to become perfectly pious is not actually holy, or it's not something that we need to search for, because it actually makes us cruel. It makes us the monsters that we don't want to be, or the monsters that we try to hide. The next category of books that I have read is the category of romance. And surprisingly, I have read quite a lot of romance books this year, which is something that I did not expect, but I thoroughly enjoyed. So the books that I have read that are classified in the romance category are Madonna in a Fur Coat, Pride and Prejudice, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, and then Bride and Maid. This year, I have noticed that all the romance books that I have read actually showed me what romance is in its full spectrum. I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of romance, which has actually shown me that romance is never easy, right? I've seen all the yearning, all the devastating emotions that you feel with romance, right? Of things that you always desire but that you can never reach for. And I have also seen the easy part of romance, the lovey-dovey type, the things that warm your heart, right? I've seen the full spectrum. And what this has taught me is that love is never easy, but love is always worth it because it reveals a part of yourself that you never thought could exist or that you never thought would be possible for you to have. Another category of books that I read accidentally is the feminist category. And in this category, I only read two books, which are The Handmaid's Tale and then Women Who Run with the Wolves. And honestly, even though these books didn't comfort me, they actually awakened me and they actually have been deeply meaningful in their own way. Starting with The Handmaid's Tale, this book was especially meaningful for me because it taught me how fragile women's rights are, right? Or any sort of minorities' rights are. It showed me how quickly autonomy can become oppression or can be stripped away just after one simple decision, right? Which I find it low-key terrifying, don't get me wrong. And to top it all off, reading Women Who Run with the Wolves not only deepened my appreciation for The Handmaid's Tale and also actually made me reinforce my feelings towards the book and towards how fragile women's rights are. But it also taught me how important or how deep patriarchy goes within us, right? We see how patriarchy is usually always presented externally, but actually patriarchy goes way deeper. It goes a layer within us, right? It actually shapes us from within. And we have to be liberated and we have to be aware that this sort of cycle exists within us and that we have to make active decisions to become free, to become the kind of woman that we want to become. And combined together, these two books have taught me that liberation begins from within, right? Because we can only fight about our rights and we can only fight about liberation when we ourselves are free. Because we need to know and we need to be very clear with who we are, what do we want, and how do we want to express our freedom. Obviously, I couldn't forget about one of my favorite categories and one of my favorite literary genres, which is horror. Surprisingly, I have only read two horror books, which is very peak on my side. Like I usually read way more horror, but yeah, that's not something that I am disappointed. I am just surprised. And the two horror books that I have read this year are The Lamb and His Black Tongue. Even though the stories are vastly different, what these two books have taught me is that fear and horror isn't always supernatural, because sometimes we see in horror stories that there is always something supernatural that appears within us, right? There is a bigger power that we see that we cannot control, right? That is something that we often see in The Black Tongue, but this book also has stories that are and feel very human. Because at the end of the day, I would say that one of the things that I love most about horror is the fact that sometimes horror comes from the human within. It comes from the monsters that we create, right? Of the creatures that are haunting us during the night, but these creatures are not only parts of ourselves, but are also the things that we are ashamed, the things that we fear that we are turning into. Because at the end of the day, the most terrifying thing that you can be is being human, especially in a universe that does not care, but also has its own horrors. And last but not least, the last category of books that I have read this 2025 is science fiction. And the two books that I have read is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov and Mikey 7. And what these two books have taught me is that even though technology advances and even though the world changes, humanity actually does not. And oftentimes we are worse off after technology and after advancements, because at the end of the day, we as humanity, we as individuals, we do not change. We actually refuse to. Science fiction always tells me that we repeat the same mistakes. We often have the same insecurities. We also have the same social struggles and also the same egos that we have to fight against and the same moral failures. We just fight it with better tools, and we also refuse to change it. We always follow the same system that is still broken nowadays. So when I step back from these categories and I see or watch all the books that I have read this year, actually I see one unifying truth, and is that I always ask the same questions, which I never have the answer for. And the questions are things like, why do we seek power? Or why are we always so obsessed with being over others? Why do we have why do we always have monsters or things that we want to hide and that we are ashamed of? And why is it that in every era, in every culture, and in every genre, we always have the same struggles? Like, for example, the main question that I ask my books, or that I try to find the answers in this book, is why do we love? Why do we destroy? Why do we fear? And why do we have this intense need to possess, right? That is something that I find very strange or very human. And is that we have this need to have, or like to experience these emotions, right? Because at the end of the day, even though I didn't get the answer in all the books that I have read this 2025, what I have gotten is clarity from all of them, right? Because at the end of the day, the fact that these four questions or these four desires appear in all the books or in the vast majority of them, that shows me that this is something that is very deeply ingrained within the human experience, right? So at the end of the day, what I am learning, or my whole conclusion of all the books that I have read, is that they allowed me to better understand humanity, but also to be more compassionate towards human experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, and all the darkest and most disgusting forms. Now, obviously, even though I have read all these books, now, obviously, we have talked about all the books that I want to read in 2025, but I want to also mention all the books that I want to read this 2026 or this next year going forwards. I still don't have a very dead set list, because obviously you guys know who I am and you know the kind of person that I am, and I can say one list and then just completely read a different list, right? Like just randomly pick books, because that's who I am, right? I love risk. But the one thing that I do want to do this next year or this 2026 is that I want to dig deeper. I want to go darker. I want to go further. I want to see like the ugliest of the ugly, right? Because I've seen the good, I've seen the ugly, but I want to see the whole spectrum of human experience. I want to read more about all these things that makes us bad, but also all the things that makes us holy and that makes us good. I want to read it all. I want to read stories about faith, about madness, about love, obsession, but also about all the things that makes us deeply flawed, right? And this is why the list, well, the more or less list that I have for this year or for this next year is are books that range from Paradise Lost, for example, or I Never Known Men, Anna Karenina, The King in Yellow, stuff like that, right? Like I will put around here all the books that I have in my TBR for now. But yeah, I want to read, or I want to feel like these books are a continuation of what I started in 2025. So, as a quick conclusion, what these books have taught me, if they have taught me anything, is that reading is never passive. Sometimes it's dangerous, but it's always deeply transformative. So, I want to thank you guys for being with me, reading with me, thinking with me, but also challenging me to read new stuff, but also to debate further. You guys are the ones that have made this channel so entertaining, but that also have driven me forwards to not only keep creating content, but also to deepen my thoughts about the books that I originally read and that I didn't realize that I was missing things. So yeah, I want to thank you guys from the deepest, most dark side of my heart. I want to thank you, and I hope I see you in 2026, and I hope you have a great new year and great rest of your holidays. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you soon. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.